with your kids.
Hola, ni hao, konnichiwa, assalamu alaikum, shalom, mahaba, moni wanji, namaste, jambo. Bienvenidos. Hi, my name is Jedley, and this is the Reading with Your Kids podcast. We are coming to you from the beautiful neighborhood of Reedville in the southwest corner of Boston, Massachusetts. We are so honored and so delighted that you join us in our mission to help all families grow closer through reading. Please be sure to tell all of your family and friends about the show, and please be sure to subscribe to the show on the iHeartRadio app, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Good Pods, wherever you find your podcasts. Our guest today is Monica Mancillas. She is here to celebrate how to speak in Spanglish. Before we invite Monica into the studio, we want to let you know that this episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast is brought to you by Rex's Journey, helping children understand and cope with emotions, written by Dr. Ambrose Turner. Looking back on childhood, you might recall everything bopping along swimmingly, playing with friends, loving your family, waking up each day happy and bursting with exuberance. Then, you might recall your emotions getting in the way of all of that, and suddenly nothing is quite so simple. Rex's Journey, helping children understand and cope with emotions, does just what it promises in the title. A kid's emotional landscape is full of hills and valleys, and kids in Rex's situation might very well experience similar fears when faced with this uncharted territory. To help guide young navigators, Dr. Turner steps in. Dr. Ambrose Turner is an expert with over 20 years of experience working with children of all ages. This is a fantastic book to add to your family or classroom library. It's Rex's Journey, helping children understand and cope with emotions, published by Mastergut Books and written by Dr. Ambrose Turner. This episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast is also brought to you by The Oasis King by Mark David Pullen. Are you looking for the perfect book to share with your family? The Oasis King is a great read full of pulse-pounding thrills, fast-paced action, and unexpected twists. Written for middle-grade readers, The Oasis King is a genre-bending book that combines action and adventure with science fiction and fantasy. Designed to be read aloud, this book was written so that both kids and adults will be on the edge of their seats waiting for what happens next. What's the best part of this book? Parents can be confident that they are giving their kids a book that has no negative content present. It's just a wholesome story designed to spark imagination and creativity for people of all ages. Get your copy today. The Oasis King, great middle grade novel by Mark David Pullen. Join us right now from the beautiful state of California. Our guest is here today to celebrate. Her brand new children's book is called How to Speak in Spanglish. Please welcome to the show, Monica Mancillas. Hola, Monica. How are you?
I'm wonderful. Thank you so much for having me.
I'm delighted to have you on, and especially since my son grew up, was very fluent in Spanglish, and very oftentimes would come into our kitchen or living room and say, I want agua, or yo quiero milk, and, you know, it was... he had lots of words. They didn't all, you know, in the two different languages, didn't always get them together, but we understood it. And I thought it was a great way for him to grow up.
I definitely think, I mean, there's nothing better than a child learning more than one language. And I think, you know, I wish it were standard in every home.
Yeah. A lot of the things that I heard growing when my son was younger is, you got to pick one or the other because he's not going to be fluent. He's going to be speaking this hybrid language forever. We found that certainly was not the case. Can you talk a little bit about that? In that, because I think that's a lot of people have that fear.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's actually one of the things that's addressed in the book is Sammy, who is the main character, has an abuelita who is has that same opinion, that you speak Spanish at home, you speak English at school, and you don't mix the two. More of a traditionalist. And Sammy tries it her way for a little while, and it just doesn't feel like him. It's not part of his identity and part of who he is and how he expresses himself. So he winds up slowly converting Abuelita to his way of thinking by getting members of the community involved in speaking Spanglish and teaching them how to speak Spanglish. I think that it's very common for children who speak more than one language to code switch, and I think in the early years when they are first, learning more than one language, it can be a little bit confusing. I used to confuse words in English and Spanish. So socks became saquetines, calcetines in Spanish, socks in English became saquetines. And sometimes, Spanglish comes, or this code switching, whatever language it happens to be, comes from not remembering how to say something in one of the languages. So you reach for the other language. But I think that over time, it does much more good to one's brain and one's ability to communicate with a wider audience of people, and also just one's sense of connection to your roots and your culture and your homeland. So I think it does a lot more good than harm. And I think over time, children, that all works itself out. It smooths itself out, or it doesn't. I have friends who still speak Spanglish, and I certainly do. If I don't speak Spanish every single day. So if I'm with my family or I'm speaking with my neighbors who are from Argentina and I can't remember a word in Spanish, I'll say it in English. And I think that's actually fine. That's linguistically okay, as long as you're communicating and being understood. Yeah.
Hey, Monica, I want to ask you this. It's something, I don't know if you've experienced this, but I experienced it. I don't have a great ability to learn new languages. My beautiful wife is originally from Puerto Rico, and I actually toured Puerto Rico a number of times with my educational magic show. And she would allow me to go out on the island by myself to play all the little towns and barrios on my own. And she would meet me in either San Juan or Ponce. She liked being in the city. Mm-hmm. And I know that, so I'm able to communicate. I know enough Spanish to get myself in trouble, and to get myself out of trouble, depending on the case. But I know that when I was touring by myself and actively trying to become more fluent, I would try to think in Spanish as I was driving around. And I noticed that thinking in Spanish, I was absolutely using a different part of my brain, but I was also looking at the world in a different way. It wasn't something I was consciously making a choice to do, but it was just something that seemed to be a result of thinking with these new words.
Oh, that's interesting. I am not an expert on linguistics or on sort of the neurobiology of what happens in your brain when you do speak multiple languages, but I think I share that experience. I feel like when I speak, for example, when I do go when I go back to Ensenada and spend time with my family, you are, different cultures speak differently. In other words, it's not just that the words are different, but the way that we form our sentences is different. The way that we use pronouns is different. In Spanish, we have gender-specific terms, which we don't use in English. So it makes sense to me that you would sort of activate a different part of your brain and be thinking in a different manner because you're having to approach language in a different way.
Yeah. I thought it was incredibly beneficial. And can you also talk, I know that I've run into some families that have been resistant to the idea of their young kids learning different languages, and even though it's something that I struggled with, I just can't for the life of me understand why you would have a problem with that. Can you talk a little bit about the benefits that you see of kids becoming bilingual?
Yeah, well, I think as I mentioned before, well, first of all, we do know there are ample studies that have shown that it is beneficial to the child's brain, that they do better academically over time when they speak multiple languages. Just as when a child learns, I happen to also be a piano teacher and a musician, so I know as well that there are studies that show that when a child learns music, learns to play an instrument, they're using their brain in a different way, and they perform better academically. So I think that there's, from an academic standpoint and from just the standpoint of a parent wanting to enrich their child's ability to learn, there's no downside to learning a second language. On top of that, it provides opportunity, right? Because the more people you can communicate with in this world, the better off you are. Mm-hmm. As you know, not everybody has the ability to travel to different countries, but as someone who has done some traveling, it opens up new worlds to you, to be able to not only go to a country and see and experience that culture, but to be able to communicate with others, or to be able to. We do live in a world that is increasingly, we are demographically mixed. Especially if you're living in the city, you're going to encounter people who speak all different languages, and I wish I spoke all of them, because it only opens doors for you to be able to communicate with others.
Yeah, I've done a little bit of traveling to different countries, and I can tell you that when you approach somebody in a different country, you don't have to be fluent in their language, but if you're able to say, "Hello, I'm sorry, I don't speak your language. Could you help me in English?" And if you say that in their language, boom, game changer. You're right. Immediately, people just, it's a great way to show respect. The folks, if I've done that, I've never encountered another problem after that. It's always people's like, "Don't worry about it. We got you covered. Let me find someone who speaks." It's just wonderful. So I encourage that if you get traveling somewhere else, at least learn how to say that, because it really comes in handy.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it does show a level of respect versus a sense of entitlement, walking into a different country and expecting that they're going to speak your language or understand you.
Yeah. Tell me, was there one thing in particular that inspired you to write How to Speak in Spanglish?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I was born in Ensenada, which is about 2 hours south of the border, the U.S.-Mexico border. And then at the age of 2, my parents moved to the United States, and so I grew up in San Diego in Southern California. And so my first language was Spanish, but of course, I was 2 years old by the time I got to the United States, and so very quickly I learned to speak English. And for some reason that I'm still not completely clear on, my parents, who are both fluent in Spanish. My dad was born and raised in Ensenada, and my mom was born and raised in Chile. They stopped speaking to me in Spanish at home. And it wasn't because they believed in assimilation or anything like that. I think it just became easier because I was speaking English at school and I would come home speaking English. However, my roots were still in Mexico, and I would go home and visit my family, and I felt very, I would become almost a different person. And it still happens to this day that I become more introverted and shy because I can't communicate as well in Spanish as I can in English. And so it's always been, to me, language is sort of the portal to my culture. And it was so deeply entrenched in my sense of identity that I felt badly about the fact that I didn't speak Spanish as well as I could have, or that I would sometimes speak Spanglish or code switch or mix up words. My debut picture book, Mariana and Her Familia, there's a moment where Mariana is speaking to her abuelita, and she accidentally calls her abuelita, agua meaning water, and abuelita meaning grandmother. And this happened to me when I was a kid, and everybody sort of chuckled and thought it was funny. And to me, it was a source of shame and embarrassment. So I really wanted to delve into this idea that it's a very common experience for children to code switch. And again, not just in Spanish, there's, children who speak Tagalog and English speak Taglish sometimes. And I think Hindish maybe is a term, Hindi and English. So it happens with children who are bilingual, regardless of what two languages they speak. And so I wanted to, empower those children and give them a sense that this is actually a really special thing and not something that they should be ashamed of or that they should try to hide, and something that we can actually embrace, because a lot of people in this country do speak these sort of hybrid languages and amongst themselves, amongst their community. And so I really wanted children to not only embrace it, but see themselves in the book and not feel so alone, because I felt very alone in that experience my whole life. And it wasn't actually until I became an author and started connecting with other Latina authors who had had the same experiences as me and started seeing our books out in the world that I realized that this was a very common experience and that I wasn't alone at all in this.
Yeah. I had a similar experience, but I wasn't a kid. I was an adult. When I first met my beautiful wife's family as we were preparing for our wedding, her aunt came up for Puerto Rico, and I wanted to ask her, how was her trip? ¿Cómo está la vieja? Viaje. Oh. And I did it. That's what I did. I asked how the old lady was instead of asked how the trip was. And she looked at me, and I go, oh, no. And we ended up, and it was incredibly embarrassing for me, and a little bit shocking for her. But it was a really quick way to break the ice, and we became very close very quickly. And so that was a lot of fun. I love this. One of the other things that I was noticing on your website is that you wrote a book about somebody that I really admire. Sing It Like Celia, talking about Celia Cruz. Can you talk a little bit about that book?
Yeah, I am incredibly excited for this book. This is going to be my middle grade debut. It comes out on April 2nd of next year through Penguin Workshop. And yeah, this book is really, you love all your book babies, but this book is really special to me. It's about a 12-year-old girl whose mother mysteriously disappears one night, and she winds up having to live with her father, who is a investigative journalist, and so he travels and lives out of his van. And while he's on a story, they wind up staying up in a fictitious Northern California town, which is loosely based on a couple of towns that I've traveled to and spent time in. And she winds up befriending a group of kids at the campground where she's staying who are locals and part of a band. And they find out that she's an incredible singer and invite her to join their band. And along the way, she discovers her voice, both figuratively and literally, in this community as she's trying to figure out what happened to her mother. And I won't reveal what happens to her mother, but the book deals a lot with issues of family separation. There's an immigrant family whose mother is being deported, and the main character, Salva, befriends the daughter. And so they sort of share this common experience of losing a parent. And that is largely based on my own experiences with having parents who were divorced as a child, and also on my younger sister's experience of having her mother disappear at the age of 4 and all of the emotions that she went through.
Well, let's make a date to have you come back in February or March to talk a little bit more about this novel.
I would love that. Oh, and I didn't mention, of course, you said Celia Cruz. Our main character loves salsa, and that's sort of her connection to her mother. Is her mother was really into Celia Cruz and salsa, and of course I adore Celia Cruz. I was a huge salsa dancer for several years and absolutely love salsa. So
wow, all I have to say is azúcar. And
yes, azúcar.
We'll talk about it in the spring. In the meantime, I just love how to speak in Spanglish. I'm imagining that this would be a great book that it could really launch a lot of really fun conversations within bilingual families, whether it's English and Spanish or English in another language, or even monolingual families, just kind of talking about giving, as we like to talk about, books being mirrors, windows, and sliding glass doors. This would be, I know a book like How to Speak in Spanglish would have given my son's classmates an ability to look through a window and see what he was experiencing at home a little bit.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, you go into almost any classroom in the United States and you're going to encounter all kinds of different cultures. And when I went to my daughter's fourth grade classroom last year and spoke to them about my debut, Mariana, and there are Spanish words throughout, and it does also touch on this idea of language being a barrier and also a connection to your roots and your family and your origins. And when I asked the children, how many of you have a family that comes from somewhere else and have had this experience of maybe being unable to relate to them completely or unable to connect with them because of a language barrier, and so many hands went up. And I talked to them a little bit about code switching and the excitement in the room. One kid was Japanese American, one kid had immigrated recently from Russia, and the kid from Russia in particular, I think it was so moving to me because he was so excited to tell me that he had the same experience of walking into school on the first day and feeling this disconnect and this language barrier because he saw himself in this story. So it's not just for children who come from a Spanish-speaking household like I did, but I think any child who has had that experience of coming from a different background is going to understand it. But as you say, I think it's also so important for the kids who maybe come from a monolingual household or a monocultural household, to relate and see that the kids in their class are from these different backgrounds. Like you said, it opens a door for them to talk about it and proudly share where they're from and what languages they speak and what shared moments they've had.
Yeah. I just thought of a fun activity for families is to just kind of think about the words that they use every day and kind of notice the words that come to us from different languages.
Yeah.
I
think that's really cool. And I've actually toyed with the idea of writing one picture book or more about the origin of words, because I find that so fascinating. Mm-hmm. Where did this word come from? And it's a question that young kids ask a lot. My daughter was always asking me, where did that word come from? What does that word mean? Mm-hmm. Why do we say that?
Yeah. I think it would be fascinating, but I also think it'd be a really great exercise for kids, or just a great lesson for kids to understand that. Yeah, we might be here in the United States, and the predominant language might be English, but there's a lot of influences and from a lot of different cultures, and our culture has influenced a lot of. So this is a beautiful, very diverse world, but we share an awful lot more than we acknowledge and that we realize, I think.
Absolutely. I completely agree.
Yeah. So you've already had your invitation come back in the spring. we need to give the people who are listening an invitation to visit your website so they can find out more about you and find out more about how to speak in Spanglish.
Yeah, absolutely. So they can find me at www.monicamancillas.com, MONICAMANCILLAS.com. And of course, I'm on all the different platforms.
Wonderful.
Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. Yep.
Yeah. We've had a great time speaking to the author of How to Speak in Spanglish. Our guest has been Monica Mancillas. Hey, Monica, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you. It was a lot of fun.
Please be sure to join us for the next episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. Laura Gell will be here to celebrate Grandpa's Window. That's the next episode of the podcast. I want to thank the folks who made today's show so wonderful. Of course, I want to start by thanking our guest, Monica Mancillas. Please be sure to check out her new book, How to Speak in Spanglish. Also, want to thank our sponsors. Mark David Pullen, author of The Oasis King, great middle grade read. I also want to thank Dr. Ambrose Haas-Turner. She is the author of Rex's Journey, 2 fantastic books that you want to add to your classroom or family library. I want to thank my team, Fatima Khan, Rory Grady, Ann O'Leary, Monica Rivera-Sosa, Madison Dieris, Soji Franklin. I want to thank my beautiful wife for all the support she gives me. Most of all, we all want to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today, and as always, thank you so very much for taking the time to make the world a better place by reading with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.